And now is the review for the last part. Hopefully, this won't be another 45-minute review. We're going to talk about media effects, regulation in the FCC, uh, ethics, and international broadcasting. So, that will be what we'll be addressing in this lecture. Okay, media effects. Couple of key principles that I wanted y'all to understand first. And that was, and so these are going to be kind of out of order, but with the terms. But basically, what do we do? How do we examine the effects of media? Well, we work with theories. And so let's talk a little bit about the types of theories and some of the dangers. First of all, in science, we try to find a causal relationship, causal explanation. This happens because of this. And the same mentality is attached to media investigations. We look at both the effects of the content on people as well as the effects of the technology on people. So, what is a scientific theory? Well, a scientific theory is basically a kind of a predictive explanation. If this, then this will happen. And it's based, it's an educated guess, if you will. And then we do research to see if that hypothesis, that reasoned guess about the causal, is actually true. Do we have a true hypothesis or do we have a null hypothesis? Did we get it right or did we get it wrong? And then we work to refine that hypothesis, or we decide, well, we were wrong on that one. So let's go through the terms. First of all, you need to understand that there's that just because A happens and then B happens, it doesn't mean there's always a causal relationship. It may be correlational. Things happen at the same time, but one does not necessarily cause the other. I walk out, I leave the house and forget my umbrella, and sure enough, it rains. Well, I noticed that it rained and I didn't have my umbrella, but that doesn't mean my absence of rain gear caused the rain to fall. I'm not quite that much of a cosmic cynic, but so it may be correlational, but it's not causally related. Um, Now, that's kind of a silly example, but uh, it does come true when, I mean, it is a significant question when you're looking at things like the relationship between, let's say, violent video games and the Columbine shooting. Did the violent video games, the play of violent video games, cause the guys to go shoot up Columbine, or was the fact that they were kind of the kind of people who would go shoot up a high school, cause them to be attracted to violent video games? You know, is it correlational or is it causal? And that's where we've got to be careful about assuming causal whenever when we just see correlational, when it may be just correlational. Okay, let's go on. One type of research is sampling-based research, uh, where as we discussed earlier with the ratings, where they take a small group of people, each who have an equal, and everybody in the population has an equal chance of being in that small sample. The more random the sample, the greater that possibility, the more accurate your results will be. And then we do research on this group, survey, whatever it might be, and then extrapolate to the larger. You've got to be careful, though. You got to make sure it truly is a random representative sample. Back, as I alluded to in class, when they had the phone surveys trying to predict the outcome of the race with Ronald Reagan. Well, the surveys were saying that he was not going to win. But what happened was he won, and not just won, he won by a landslide. And the problem was that their survey was biased. They were calling people at home, because you're not going to call people at their business, and they called them during the day. Well, who's at home? Primarily, a large part of the population was at work. So they got a disproportionate um, uh, survey of the unemployed, perhaps of women, of people who worked the night shift who were just mad that they were awakened. You know, you didn't get a truly representative population. Everybody who went to work had no chance of being in that population. Therefore, there was a bias. There was sampling error. Um, one type of analysis that is done, and I'm going to pull it out. Is a content analysis, which is what my master's thesis is. It's a content analysis. And content analysis, you actually count how many things are in that particular, how many times particular occurrence happens in the text. My thesis was on the movie To Kill a Mockingbird. I counted and how many times the camera was at eye level, at high level, or at low level, shooting scout to tell the story. So taking that count, in fact, let's see. See that? Just numbers. That was part of my research, whereby I built up my evidence to make my case. So that would be a content analysis. You may count how many times women are in leadership positions in primetime television viewing. How many times, they'll do this with how many times people of, a particular ethnic group are representative, Arabs as terrorists, whatever it might be. That's the way that's the content analysis, when they literally take off and check. Okay, we saw it happen 3 times in this show, that type of thing. Other types of studies would be experimental studies. That's when you set a controlled environment. I told you about the Bobo the Clown. You have field studies where you go and watch and observe when people are involved in their behaviors. How many people roll through a stop sign at a certain intersection versus how many times people will stop. Then you have an ethnographic study where a person actually becomes part of the group you're studying to kind of get the inside scoop on them as part, maybe joining a group of gamers if you're going to do some research on the gaming community, things like that. Whenever you do analysis, especially quantitative analysis, numbers, you do use a lot of numbers, and there's something called statistically significant. Just because, let's say, you use a percentage and 51% of the time your hypothesis comes true, and 49% it's not verified. Well, that 2% is really not what I'd call statistically significant, and there are actually computations for particular types of studies. What is statistically significant? So you got to make sure that although there may be a difference, is it significant? Does it prove or significantly disprove? If you had that 51-49 ratio, well, it doesn't mean your hypothesis is wrong. It just may mean you need to do some further refining of your hypothesis to get, where you have some statistical significance. Congruence and selective exposure. This is one of the theories people work with. That is that people tend to want to watch things that are congruent with their current beliefs, and they will selectively expose themselves to that type of content. Whether it's news sources, drama, entertainment, whatever it might be, that reinforces what they already believe. Gatekeeper. Okay. A gatekeeper basically says that there are people who are in control of the media, and they're the ones who determine what we see and what we don't see, and how we see what we see. So with this gatekeeper function, the people who control programming, okay, well, they determine what programs are going to be on and which ones aren't. The people the assignment editor at a TV station or at a radio station assigns certain stories to be reported on the broadcast. But by choosing A, B, and C, they're excluding E, F, and G. So again, the gatekeeper, what you can see, what you can't see. Now with digital media, with the new media, we become the gatekeepers. If I don't like what the programming director at CBS has chosen for a particular night, they actually pulled off my NCIS for some sort of event. Well, then I will just go to Netflix and watch what I want to watch. That's the gatekeeper in terms of that. That role is kind of becoming more nebulous. The same is true for news. More more and more people are going on the internet and going to the news sources they choose to go to, rather than what comes out of the dictates of offices in New York. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out when, with the democratization of the media, you and I play more of a gatekeeper role as well. Depends on what we shoot with our cell phones, perhaps. This also falls in with the idea of agenda setting. Media may not necessarily tell you what to think, but they will tell you what you're thinking about. If everybody is carrying information on the Super Bowl, one station is carrying it and people are reporting it, well, you may not like football, but you may be saying, oh yeah, the Super Bowl was on last night. Well, you're talking about the Super Bowl. Whether you have a favorable or an unfavorable opinion about it, they've set the agenda for conversation. And people want to be informed about this. They want to be able to sound like they're in the know when they're talking around the water cooler at work or something like that. So, this is an important role. Now, the two-step flow. Two-step flow is that people, not only when you want to affect persuasion in a culture, yeah, you want to talk to the common man, but you want to find out who the leaders are. This is one theory in media. And you'd use media to bring the leaders on board and use their influence to talk to the masses, to the people at large. Selective perception, that's that people tend to perceive things as they want to see them. If you support one candidate and hate another candidate, well, you're likely to hear everything that you hate from candidate that you hate, and reinforces your despising of that candidate, and you'll gloss over maybe faults on this other candidate because you like this candidate. So you'll selectively perceive what you receive about each candidate. Uses and gratifications theory. Okay, I do have agenda setting function up there, but we've already talked about that. Uses and gratifications theory is basically people will use media to satisfy and gratify certain needs. Information, mainly they like a particular kind of entertainment. They want to escape. So they'll seek out media that achieves those goals for them, serves those purposes. Glow and flow principle. This is basically how we use media out of habit. You sit down at Facebook and 2 hours later you're like, what have I been doing? You just kind of go with it. So you just flow from one thing to the next to the next. And people do this with television. Turn on the television and it stays on all day long, and you just kind of have it there. One thing to remember about this with the research. Research in effect started off with kind of the idea of the hypo. I inject media content in you, and then you will respond a certain way. Then people came to realize that there were other intervening factors that came in, how the person grows up. The recipient of the communication affected the response as well. And as they understood the role that the audience plays, that became a little bit more significant. So just be careful about people saying, oh, they had to do this because of media. No, there were things in the person as well that affected how they received the message and then behaved. Okay, so that's just now I'm not saying this is everything, this is just to help you talk through these basic terms. Now, regulation in the FCC was the next thing. First of all, what allows for, why can the FCC, why does the federal government have the right to regulate? Well, one of the things, especially in light that Congress shall enact no law abridging freedom of speech. So why do they have the right? Well, one of the reasons they have the right is because of the Commerce Clause. Commerce Clause is basically the federal government regulates all, and I'm turning off the TV so it's no longer a distraction, has jurisdiction over all interstate commerce. Well, radio and television cross state lines, therefore they are interstate, across states. So the federal government claims jurisdiction over broadcasting. Another reason they, especially with broadcasting, is because of the intrusiveness factor. That's the idea that, whereas with print, I've got a whole lot of text around me, but I can choose to look at this, I can choose to look at this, I can choose to see that. I don't have to focus. But with video, I could say pink flamingos. Well, now you've heard pink flamingos, and you can't go back and unhear pink flamingos. It intrudes. It's linear. It happens this, and you won't know that something has hit you until after it's hit you. Therefore, in order to protect, because of this powerful intrusive factor, the government claims a jurisdiction over that as well, that it doesn't claim over print, because print has more of a choice. You can say, oh, I'm not going to look at that picture, and then move on, or see what's in the book, and nah, I don't want it. Let me see. There's also the other principle is the idea of scarcity. The electromagnetic spectrum is a limited resource. You can print all the pages you want as long as we have trees, but you can't put as many TV stations or radio stations in the spectrum. It's limited. So since it's a national resource owned by you and I, the public, the government, in its beneficence, regulates and controls it for our sake. That's why we have the PCON standards. I got to that. PCON, P-I-C-O-N, Public Interest, Convenience, or Necessity. That is a standard that judges, that is used to determine FCC action, but it is also the standard by which stations are supposed to operate. They're supposed to serve the public interest, convenience, or necessity. Processing rules. Let me see. What are processing rules? Basically, not everything goes to the commissioners of the FCC. Oh, well, let me back up a little bit, first of all. What is the FCC? FCC is a quasi-legislative organization set up by Congress to regulate the broadcasting industry. It was established by the Communications Act of 1934. You have your 5 commissioners. Remember that no more than 3 can be from one party, so you can have one party totally dominating the FCC. They are appointed by the president with congressional approval, Senate approval, and Congress sets the budget. That's how we have the checks and balances between the legislative, and all the decisions of the FCC can be reviewed by the judicial. So the president has a part, the executive branch, legislative has a part, and the judicial all have a role in supervising the work of the FCC. Now, the commissioners, what is the work of the FCC first? FCC sets regulations, guiding, if you will, how the industry operates to serve the public interest, convenience, or necessity. Their primary job, though, is the issuing of licenses for radio and television, so that we don't have the insanity that happened back in the 20s as radio broadcast stations just exploded and people were stepping all over each other. So, and they serve a very important role. How do you know what gets up to the commissioner? Let's say something happens with my FCC, or let's say my station's being interfered with somebody else's, and I say, I have protection. This is supposed to be my frequency. Get off of it. He says, no, I'm not going to get off your frequency because I want this frequency. And so I appeal to the FCC to get enforcement. Well, they're not going to go to a commissioner on that. They're going to go to a lower level person who says, you who are broadcasting outside of your license, you need to stop, cease and desist. You got to stop what you're doing. You're broadcasting at too high a power, too high a antenna, and you're stepping on this guy, and he's already got a license for this frequency. And if you don't, we're going to fine you. And if you don't do it that, then we're going to shut you down. You know, the FCC, a decision like that doesn't have to go up to the commissioners. So they have processing rules to sort through what sort of things need to go up to be addressed by the commissioners. Those are called processing rules. Now, if the FCC is looking at setting up some new policies, let's say for the change to digital for television, they'll start looking at how they're going to do the process. So they'll send out a notice of inquiry. And the notice of inquiry is when they will say, hey, we're looking at examining, let's say, the digital transition in television. What's your input on this? And they'll send it out to educators, industry leaders, technical leaders, whatever it might be, who have some knowledge and input, and invite their comment. Then they will form a report, and propose rules based on that, and they're subject to, again, posted on the FCC website now, for broadcasters and other concerned parties to examine and make commentary. And after they get all that in, they prepare a report in order, which is, these are the policies we want to see put in place, this is justification, etc. Then that is sent to the commissioners, who will sign off. And if it gets signed off as it stands, they issue a report and order. And the report and orders are numbered. So the sixth report in order for television was the sixth report in order produced by the FCC. I don't know how many have been, I think they're up to like number 12 or something by now, but don't quote me on that. I don't know. I heard something in passing. Okay, so that's one of the things the FCC does, is issue reports and order, regulatory guidelines. But I mentioned their primary job is issuing a license. So what do you do in order to get a license? To get a license, you have to first determine if any frequencies are available. That means you go out and get an engineer who will run their computer program looking at the way the different stations have their broadcast areas where they are reached. Excuse me, my voice is getting tired. And then you'll find the frequency that's available in your area. It won't cause interference with other stations. And you get your engineer's report. Then you get all of your financial information, ownership information together, and you wait for a filing window. The FCC opens up, short 2 or 3 week periods of time, and where they'll take new applications, and they'll post in advance. They'll say, okay, they'll give a date, November 15th. We'll open up the filing window from November 15th to December 10th. And then people wait, and as soon as November 15th is there, they have it sent in for that date, so it hits the FCC, and then their applications are considered. If they have 2 people who want the same frequency, then they have a bidding war to see who is ready to pay the most for it. Used to be you have to have a hearing, but now they just made it a bidding contest. And then whoever gets this, who wins the frequency, gets what they call a construction permit. That's 3 years to build your facility and start broadcasting, and what we call getting compliance, making sure you're in compliance with the FCC. When you can state compliance, then you apply for your license and you get your full broadcast license. Now, if you get a construction permit, that means you're going to get your license as long as you achieve compliance. So it's not like they're going to issue a construction permit and this guy build and then they're going to give it to another guy. It's if you get the CP, construction permit, you're going to get the license when you build your facility. License renewal every 8 years, I believe. You have to kind of make an accounting to the FCC. Used to be a long, arduous process, a stack of papers. Now it's a couple of forms where you state compliance, but you have to invite any of people in your audience. If they have comments, you tell them how they can contact the FCC to make any comments, good or bad, about your station that should be taken into consideration. And when we talk about the public file, I'll go into that more. Now, but when the license renewal comes up, you basically state in your market that you're up for license renewal, invite comment. We had to do this a couple of years ago. And then you submit your form, and the FCC takes your form, your applications for license renewal, checks to see if there's any major problems with your operations. And if there's not, you get a renewal. There's kind of a presumption of renewal unless you've really messed up, unless you've been in noncompliance on whatever it might be, technical or other considerations. Pardon me, I'm getting a message, so sorry I can't talk right now. There. So that's with the construction permit, license renewal, excuse me. Now, license renewal is one of the punitive, if you will, coercive measures the FCC can take. If you do repeatedly violate. You have content that you're not supposed to have. You know, you're showing pornography or something, or you're showing obscene material that are indecent material during times when you shouldn't be. Case in point, when the great wardrobe malfunction at the, not great, but you know, the renowned or infamous, that's the best word, at the Super Bowl. Well, the stations that were owned by the network that carried the game were fined. These are called forfeitures. The FCC can impose forfeitures for non-compliance. I know someone who didn't make their issues, community concerns and issues reports, and wasn't doing that properly. Well, he got hit by $40,000 in fines. So yeah, non-compliance can cost you. So the FCC does have that. So that's one way they can punish a station that's not following the true path. Another way they can do it comes at license renewal. They can just not renew the license. This doesn't happen that often. But they can say, okay, we'll renew your license, but we need to see this behavior change. And if it's not, then your license is terminated. Or they may say, you, instead of waiting 8 years, we're going to re-examine your license application. You can go for the next 3 years, and we want to see that you've been behaving yourself. And after 3 years, if you can verify that you've been behaving yourself, then we'll extend you out for the full 8 years or whatever they decide. So there is accountability there. The harshest measure that the FCC can take is they can, if you really blow it, I know of a station in Jackson, because of unfair employment practices, this happened to them, a WLBT. Their license was taken from the original owners and sold to someone else. They'll just revoke your license and sell it to someone else. So yeah, you don't want to go there. FCC, that is the authority that the FCC has been entrusted with by Congress. So they can't do this. You see, forfeiture, we've discovered that's the fines. Must carry rules. Okay. When cable started growing, and local broadcast stations saying, hey, they're not carrying us, so people are choosing cable instead of listening to us off the air, we're being blocked out. So must carry rules were instituted that said that cable stations must carry the local broadcasters in their offerings. Okay, the cease and desist order. Station is violating policy. Pardon me. Non-compliance. Then FCC will issue a cease and desist order. Cut it out. Stop it. That's what that means. Reporter's privilege is the idea that a reporter's communication with someone is confidential. They can take the information, but they can guard their sources. And these are called shield laws. Now, they're not federal. They vary from state to state. So states with strong shield laws means basically that, let's say, you know something, and you've tried to get some things done, and your company's not listening. And so you go and you're a whistleblower, as they call them, and you go to a reporter, and you say, hey, do not mention my name in your report, but you may want to go, let's say, you may want to go out to Elbow Bend Creek and get a water test out there. There's some stuff coming out of the factory up there that they're not admitting to, but it's it's poisoning the water that's hitting that the cattle are drinking out of, or that's feeding the ponds where the fish are growing, and we got a health issue here. Okay, so the reporter gets a sample and sends it to a lab, and lo and behold, yeah, they have these poisons in there, and they do a story on it. And this makes a big hullabaloo, and the company is taken into court, and they say, well, we want to know your source. In some states, the reporter can be held in contempt of court if they do not disclose sources. In other states, there are shield laws that protect the reporter from having to divulge their sources, so that people. This is to help people to have more confidence about getting information out that could serve the public need. When companies or people are doing things that are illegal or dangerous. Okay, intrusiveness, I've already talked about that. The reason shield laws are important is because if without shield laws, people may be hesitant to report on things that need to be said because they know that their name may be turned in by the reporter who might be compelled or face contempt of court. And reporters don't want to go sit in jail, so they may. If a reporter gets reputation for not protecting sources, they're hurting their ability, people's trust of them, with sensitive information that may need to get out. Community standard, that's called a chilling effect when people aren't willing to go and share information. Community standards, basically with regard to indecency. What is indecent in one market may not be in another, but stations are supposed to respect the community standard for what would be considered decent or indecent content to carry for that market, and that is considered a legitimate standard in cases where obscenity or indecency are being charges are being brought or by citizens groups, let's say. Prior restraint. Okay, this would be called censorship. The Communications Act forbids, of 1934 forbids censorship, meaning prior restraint. The government cannot stop a broadcast entity from saying something or showing something. Now, that's censorship if they do that. You can't hold somebody accountable, punish them for a crime they haven't committed yet, basically, in terms of free speech. But a broadcast entity can be held accountable after the fact for having broadcast something. It may be a civil suit about for libel. You may publish something about an individual, and it turns out it wasn't true, and they may sue you in a civil case. But it's not a criminal case. Other things that are said, that may be related to national security, they may get it out, but then they may have their license revoked the next day. The license revocation would be if it was really like major things that led to a national catastrophe. You might have a revocation, but it would have to be after the fact. They can't go in and say, "Oh, you have this information, we're shutting you down, so you can't say it." That would be prior restraint. So censorship is prior restraint. Censure, S-U-R-E, ship, is holding accountable after the fact. I did pass one thing. The Circuit Court of Appeals. Actually, the Circuit Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C., Ninth District, I believe, is where cases involving the FCC are heard, because that's where the Court of Appeals, they work through the process within the FCC, but if somebody appeals the decision of the FCC, that's where that appeal would be heard in the Court of Appeal. Okay, community standards, prior restraint, scarcity principle, limited electromagnetic spectrum, we've already talked about. Libel. Okay, defamation is bringing publishing or putting out information about a person that will subject them to public ridicule, shame, public harm. That's defamation. Untrue information, lies, basically. If you publish it, and publish can mean either print or put out over the electronic media, that's how we publish in electronic media, then it's called libel. And that's why the social media, when you put out there to public, people say, "Oh, it's just my private communication." But it's made public and it's published, so you're looking at libel there, possibly. A legitimate case can be made. Now, slander is not published, but defamation. Unpublished defamation, me starting a whispering campaign about a candidate that I don't like for something that's untrue. That would be slander. It's lies said about somebody person to person, not published, but still damaging. And that can be prosecuted in a civil case. The defense for libel and slander is that it's true. Simple enough. Now, you have something related to this that's called privacy. There is the right to privacy and our invasion of privacy. If somebody, let's say, they might, if someone were to put a recording device in my house and catch me griping about a particular person or something like that, and then report it, well, that wasn't intended for them to hear. That would be an invasion of privacy. If they were to shoot pictures using a long lens into my house, into my window, to get scandalous pictures, that would be an invasion of privacy. But if I'm standing on the street corner and I say something, well, and a reporter overhears, that's not an invasion of privacy because I was saying it out in public. It wasn't published, but it was there where people could hear. Now, invasion of privacy, a person has a right to their name, their image, to be exploited, to freedom from being exploited for financial gain. So if I were to, let's say, take a picture, take a picture of some famous person walking into my restaurant, and then use that in a commercial, and use their name and their face and not pay them, that would be a privacy violation as well. They deserve compensation for the use of their face or their name. So you need to be aware of the privacy laws in your area. But as a general rule of thumb, if it's out in a public setting, it can be used as long as it can be used as long as you're not singling a person out. But if you're going to single a person out, you need to get a signed release that they know that you're using their video, and they acknowledge that they're not receiving financial compensation for it. Okay. Scarcity, libel, obscenity. Okay, obscenity. The book I have in my Facebook. Not Facebook, in PowerPoint. It's been a long day. That obscenity, appealing or reference to appealing to the prurient interest with sexual excretory terminology and or body parts that are strictly in the prurient interest, no artistic redeeming value. In other words, obscene. And that's always forbidden for broadcast. There's something called indecency, which and I told you the story about the George Carlin's 7 things you can't say on radio, and so he put him in a comedy routine, and then some dumb DJ played it on broadcast, and played on broadcast on radio the 7 words you can't say on radio, and this caused a court challenge, and the result of the court challenge was that a safe harbor was carved out from about 11 o'clock at night till 6 o'clock in the morning, where adults are presumed to be watching, and they so in that safe harbor, things that may be more edgy can be used, but during normal broadcast daytime when the kiddies will be up, it's supposed to keep a higher standard on that. Personal attack rule. That's if somebody engages in in attack on another person on the air, the person that was attacked has the right to request and expect a chance to give a response. Safe harbor I've mentioned. Section 315, equal opportunity. This is basically if for the equal time provision, that's the term I'm looking for, that in an election, a station cannot sell advertising to one candidate for an office and then refuse to sell to another candidate for that same office. That way the media can't block people from getting their message out for political office. Now, that doesn't mean that the stations have to give time. It's and they cannot give time to one candidate and not give it to another. If I give to this candidate, I have to give to this candidate as well. And you can't charge one price for candidate A and another price for candidate B. All advertising has to be at the lowest unit cost. So what do you charge as your lowest unit cost for that particular spot? That's what you have to charge for advertising. This does not include news coverage. This does not include news events. But when it comes to advertising or buying time, if you sell to one candidate for a particular office, you have to sell for another. If you sell to one candidate for mayor, you do not necessarily have to sell it to the candidate for city councilman, but you have to be ready to sell it for every other candidate for mayor. And I've explained the lowest unit charge. Okay. This not only applies to candidates, but I know this experientially, it's regard to anything that's on a ballot. I told you the story how at the station we were looking at a wet-dry election. We were a dry county, and the pastor wanted to broadcast his sermon advocating staying dry for our county. Well, if I carried a sermon, I'd have to be willing to sell comparable time to the pro-wet forces in the county. That's required. That would be required by Section 315 because it was a ballot issue. Now, this leads to a discussion of the Fairness Doctrine. And the Fairness Doctrine was in place for a while to make sure it was theoretically supposed to guarantee equal balance and coverage on issues of controversy. But what happened was that people started, as more and more voices came into the marketplace, we really don't need this, and they stopped enforcing it. And eventually the requirement of the Fairness Doctrine was lifted. So we don't have a requirement, like say as a Christian station, we didn't have to carry pro-Muslim or pro-atheist content. We didn't have to balance out in our coverage. And this allowed for the growth of more conservative-oriented programming, in fact. There have been attempts to revive the Fairness Doctrine, but now with the multitude of voices in the media, it's not seen as necessary generally. Copyright is another issue. Basically, copyright ensures that if you produce something, you get the money for what you produced. It's protect you as a creator. Just be aware that fair use, the concept of fair use, is that yes, there are some things that we are permitted to use, like maybe samples of radio broadcast or songs, little snippets. And for educational purposes, I can show video content of film as part of being a teacher, or you can use it for commentary. Either you're going to give a movie review, or parody actually is seen as a form of commentary. So that's considered fair use as well. Now, what about broadcasters who want to use recorded songs and recorded material? Well, we pay for blanket rights, blanket licenses. We pay BMI, ASCAP, CCAM, and Sound Exchange. ASCAP, BMI, and CCAM take the money, and then they take a survey of our programming, and then they say, okay, you ran this song so many times, so this writer gets this bit of money, this writer gets this bit of money. So instead of me having to talk to all of the distributors and have agreements with all of them, we all just agree we'll put our money into this pot, and they'll divide the money up amongst the artists and distributors in accordance to how things have been played. It makes it a lot easier. I'm writing 3 checks instead of writing 300. The signal. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else with regulation that we need to deal with. I think that's pretty much it. My throat is almost shot, so I'm going to take a break now, and I'll have the final installment tomorrow. Take care.